Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to the channel. So I've been scrolling through Reddit and I've came across a thread when countries share their grandparents' war stories, and I just found it really funny. I've been scrolling for a couple of minutes. I thought, I might as well just do a video on it, see if you guys like it. If you do, let me know in the comments, guys. Drop a like, share and subscribe. But yeah, when countries share their grandparents' war stories, there's a funny video. We'll start it off with this, I guess.
Actually, my grandfather, he was a part of D-Day, and he helped liberate Holland.
My grand-père helped the resistance in Paris.
Both of my grandparents were medics during the bombing of London and saved countless lives.
Hey man, what about you? Was your granddad part of the war?
So four! I think he was probably too young, I don't know, he probably was too young, I hope he was too young. Oh, look at the watch. Such late already.
Excuse me.
We should go on the walk if we want to leave now. Why are we talking about war? What?
Right, so that's it. I'm trying to find a few of these threads. We got a guy here who we got hyper proper. My dad was an electrician. Just found his old uniform with two lightning emblems and a skull on a cap to show he worked with high voltage. I don't know. This is the thing. I'm quite gullible, so let me know in the comments, guys, if I'm actually being gullible with this. I can't tell if people are just writing comments for the sake of it. Leonson76 says, "Are we baddies?" That's got 2.2 upvotes. 1,000. That's crazy. Yeah, an SS, which means supreme, super supreme. No, I don't think it means that, guys. All right. What else we got? I've seen some good ones down here. Here we go. A Martian potato. You gotta love Reddit, man, especially with the names of these people. Reddit's a bit of a hidden gem. If you haven't been on here, you need to get yourself on there, guys. You find some great stuff. So he says, my grandfather was Luftwaffe, trained by Fly Meschmitz, but by the time he finished training, the Battle of Britain was well over and the German army needed some infantry, so he got shunted over there. Never actually flew in combat. Then he got captured and spent the rest of the war and the 4 years after as a prisoner of war. Jeez, right, okay, so, little bits of snippets of information like this that you would just not notice and not probably never hear unless you like stumbled across stuff like this. So I quite like it. Like I'm gonna keep on doing this. And Marsh Potato says, yeah, they didn't release prisoners of war right away. Most of the ones captured by the West, like my grandfather, were released by 1950. The USSR kept some up until 1956. Really? Surely not until 1956. I know, although saying that, USSR back in the day was a different kettle of fish, and obviously they suffered the most casualties of war by an unbelievable margin, guys. All right, most people think that certain minorities suffered the biggest casualties, but Russia, when you look at the death count that they had in their country, it was literally it was disgusting. It was a disgusting amount. You can watch a video on it. In fact, I did a video of this on my channel about how many people perished who were native to Russia. It was a hideous amount of people, guys. All right. What does Professional Rashness say? Being a Nazi captured by the USSR sounded horrible. Ex-girlfriend of mine lived in Siberia. It took 6 hours to fly her to town from Moscow, so it was deep in Russia. When we got there, she told me some of the history of the town. It was built with the help of Nazi prisoners who were marched out there on foot. She said hundreds died just getting to the location where they were forced to work as slaves for years. Nice town, though. What? See, these are the things that you don't hear, guys, all right? There's little bits of information in the books, you watch your documentaries and stuff, but then you start reading into, people's accounts, their own accounts that have been passed down from family members and stuff. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Mr. Magic, what are you saying? Going to Siberia on foot is a tradition in Russia back from the 16th century. Right, okay, I don't know what to believe. But then again, Russia is pretty crazy for stuff like that. Siberia is actually a lot more hospitable than I expected. Being from the US, I pictured it like how our rural areas are, with the small house or cluster of buildings every mile or so. But in Siberia, a lot of the towns are built like mini cities. You'll be driving in open fields or forests and then just come up on a dense cluster of buildings. When I stayed there with my ex-girlfriend, was walking distance. We got something notarized. We grabbed some sushi, sent some mail, and visit a grocery store, all within 5-10 minute walks. 5-10 minute walk of another. Close proximity of stuff is probably necessary for the harsh winters. Yeah, I can understand that. Now, when I was in Albania with the Royal Marines, we were in the mountains there for quite some time. And I actually injured my ankle up there as well. The weather was horrendous, like, that's one thing I'll say. And in the middle of the mountains, there was a bit of a plateau right at the top of these mountains in Albania. And there was these big, huge, monstrous buildings. And there were, I believe, old Russian, old USSR buildings that were built there in the war effort, okay? And they were absolutely monstrous. All empty, of course, bar one person. There was an old woman. She must have been aged 80 or 90. I don't know if that's because of the weather, that she looked that old, or she was actually that old. And she kept on stealing all of our diesel from the vehicles. And it was a weird situation, because we were up there in all of our military kit, and we thought the conditions were bad for ourselves, and then we saw this woman who was living up there in this old abandoned Soviet building, and the weather can get treacherous there. And I was thinking, my goodness, man, this old woman's up here by herself, and we kind of let her just take diesel to a degree, because she was enduring the weather. I think some guys may have even give her food as well, which was nice. So what does No 92 say? This is not just how it works in Siberia, but pretty much the entirety of Europe, barring the odd farm that is way out. Really? Is that how it works? This is just how towns were built back in the day, when obviously today's mobility just wasn't possible. American rural areas are structured in a way that is to most Europeans unheard of, unless they actually have seen it themselves in the States. Yeah, I can understand that. I've been to the States as well. It is built differently, but it's quite it's a very young country, isn't it? So the way they do things is probably a lot more efficient based on the technology of today. It's a lot more advanced, isn't it? But when I was around a lot of these European places, yeah, they do have the way of getting around things, and one of the ways that they got around in World War One and Two was a thing called Klettersteigen. I'm not sure if I pronounced it properly, but that's how I pronounced it when I was in Austria. And it's effectively, if you just imagine climbing, the rock face, but you've got steel steel pins into the side of the cliffs, and there's wires going to and fro from each pin, so you grapple your way along the mountainside. Now, that was designed for carrying munitions and military kit and supplies and people, in some cases, to places that you would not normally be able to pass. Some places in Austria and Germany you just literally can't pass unless you climb part of a mountain, or if you want to get a vantage point or something like that for tactical superiority. And it was a fascinating thing. We got to go to some amazing places doing Klettersteigen, all right? And let me know in the chat if you've done that before. It's quite a good way of getting about, actually. And at the time, one of the only ways of getting about to certain places, all right, depending on what the environment was. Top Gun 2021. So keeping up with the theme of when countries shared their grandparents' war stories, Top Gun says, my uncle's dad was a German medic on the Eastern Front when the Russians steamrolled. When the Russians steamrolled them, they got an X-ray of a guy with TB and said, I have TB. The Russians gave him to the US as a prisoner. Man. My grandfather fought on the Eastern Front. He never talked about the war. That's normally something that we see with the elder generation. They don't brag. They don't hold no bragging rights. They got no ego. They just got on with it, and they keep those stories close to the heart, not like this generation. And he says, but I heard from my mum that he went absent without leave, AWOL, when he saw the writing on the wall because he did not want to end up in the gulag. Made it all the way home to my granddad on foot, and just a few days before the war ended. Apparently he had several close calls with both sides of the war too, but I don't know many details about that. Harrowing stories, guys. Yep, my grandfather was held in a gulag until 1956 as well. He was 14 years old when he originally caught and imprisoned. What? 14 years old, man. Jeez, you can't even join the military in this country at that age. At the tail end of the war, the Germans were desperate and forced teen boys into combat. It was really messed up, man. That's such a sad story. Must have gone to Western prison. If it was the East, he could have been there in the 50s, yeah. What else we got? So Beastmaster 11, I'll step up. My grandfather fought in Ethiopia and in Greece. He participated in the invasion of Abyssinia in 1935 and the invasion of Greece in 1940. Like other Italians, he didn't have a choice. His opinion was go or die. Yeah, back in the day, that's the way it was. It's not like now where you sign on the dotted line, but you don't really have to do anything if you don't want to. It's just the way it is. He says, I often ask myself, what would I have done if I was in his shoes? Well, I like to think that I would have been the brave one and refused to go. The reality is that I likely would have strapped on my boots and picked up the rifle, not because I wanted to, but because the risk of death is a huge motivator, yeah. That's very true, actually. You know, certain motivators in people you might actually be shocked about. You might actually think, you know what, death is a motivator. If that's the only option, then I'm going to get motivated to do something different, and sometimes you don't really have to have something good motivating you. It can be something bad as well. And in them times, the Great War, people were motivated in more ways than one. And a lot of the time, believe it or not, I know the United Kingdom was quite religiously motivated back in the day. People were believing they were fighting for king, country, and God as well. It was quite a different place back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, especially religiously in this country. All right, everyone was God-fearing, so it did change the dynamic. Right, here's a long one from Sax90. No joke, my father tried it. He never found out what his grandfather's real role was during the war. He was never in combat as far as we know. We only know that he wasn't SS. Okay. He was able to find a distant uncle on his father's side, called the distant cousin first and had a good talk. The cousin had no idea and was really curious. Well, my dad called the said uncle and his reaction was, surname. I swore that I would never talk to one of your assholes again. What? Then he hung up. We never found out what happened between them during the war. Wow, that's really bad. They must have been teenagers both and fleeing from East Prussia. We don't put it past my great-grandma to abandon him somewhere in order to get her own children to safety, but who knows, we'll never find out. So that's one of those stories that's just going to be lost in time. Medic says, my step-grandfather was in Hitler Youth. What? Their family bailed when he was 14. Apparently they got caught on the bad shit happening. He will not talk about anything from that time. I can understand why. All we've been able to learn is they fled to England, then to Canada. Okay. So it's easy, a sketchy story or a boring story. We don't even know what his parents did for work or anything, right? So something's being kept hush hush big time in that family there. Now, the fact that he was in the youth, the Hitler Youth, and then the family bailed at 14, you've got to have balls of steel anyway to kind of abandon that because of the repercussions of what could happen if you got caught from abandoning it. And to come to England as well, the opposition, and then eventually get to Canada. I think they've had a lucky escape there. A lucky escape. Schneck Queen. The names on this just get me every time, man. If it makes a difference, my grandmother survived the Blitz. She won't talk about it at all, and that's not uncommon with others who did. Some things are too traumatic to tell your loved ones, especially for that generation. Human brains often also shut down out memories formed during traumatic times, so they may not generally remember the details, especially as he was only 14. Yet my grandmother was evacuated to London, actually, from Durham And yeah, she went there, and then eventually, obviously, London ended up getting blitzed, you know, by the air raid, by the air raids and stuff like that, and she ended up getting sent back home a couple of days after, or a week after, or something after she left. The whole street got bombed and blasted to bits. So it just, you know, my grandmother on my dad's side is like, you know, the head of the family now because my granddad's passed. Got loads of daughters, sons, loads of grandchildren and great grandchildren, and you just think one action, one deviation in the plan, one little change in the scenario, and you've wiped out generation after generation after generation. You know, how many memories would have been wiped out? And it's just crazy, the anomalies of war. I like to look at it like that, and I do think about all of the people that have lost their lives due to war, casualties on both sides, and think, wow, all the generations of people that have lost their lives to war. Now think about this. How many geniuses were among them? How many Nobel Peace Prize winners would have been among them? How many world champion wrestlers, boxers, sportsmen and women would have been among them? How many people would have innovated something that would have cured a major disease, you know? How many of those people would have invented something that would have changed the course of history forever? You know? This is what I think, and I don't think much thought pattern goes into it. If we did think about these things proactively, preemptively, I do think war would be less favoured amongst most nations, but that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments, guys. Baggy Corp, he says, nah, it's kind of interesting. As a German, you have to learn very early that the mistakes of your ancestors don't define you. I agree. And the best thing you can do is learn from them so you don't happen again. Of course, this guy seems bright. Also, not every German was a Nazi at the time. I think people forget that as well. On my mother's side of the family, one great-grandfather of mine was a leftist who, with two of his brothers, died in KZ for planned protests. The other great-grandfather on this side of the family was a super Nazi who was very proud of his 3-digit number. Man. After the war, the children met and formed a family. Yeah, I do agree. I think it's easy to kind of, you know, stigmatize an entire nation wrongfully sometimes for wrongdoings. Wrongdoings of the past. We can learn from them. You know, especially in war. I think we've got time for another story. What time are we on? About 18 minutes. Yeah, we got Doc Spit. This has got to be a good one. So this is my great uncle, conscripted into the military at 14. During the last year of the war, as he told the story, he spent most of the time retreating from the Russians with his unit and trying not to get left behind, because if he was found on his own too far away from his unit, he'd have been shot for desertion. The rules of war always baffled me. The first thing that baffles me, and it should baffle everyone here, is the very fact that rules exist for war. It doesn't make sense in my head. Yes, it can be explained, it can be articulately described, and it can be legitimate with laws and legislation and all of this kind of stuff. But to me, how the hell can you have war and then contradict it with rules? And then, you know, I don't know, if you can have rules in war, you can have a situation where you don't have war. You know, let's have rules to not have war. Isn't that, you know, if you've got rules in war, why not have rules to not have war, ever? I know that's a bit controversial, but do you see my thought pattern? Do you see the way I'm thinking? And I'm, you know, a former Royal Marine, and that's the way I think. That's the way most lads think, and lasses think in the military. I'm not speaking for everyone, but trust me, there's less people in the military war-hungry than you'd think. Okay, but hey guys, if you like that type of content, please like, share and subscribe to the channel, and let me know if you want to see me do some more Reddit type stories, reactions, whatever you want. If you know any good stories on Reddit, drop a comment below with the link and I'll react to it. But other than that, I'll see you later. Peace.